Well, hello and welcome back to Elegant Simplicity. I'm Nick Richmond, Director of Design at Tricordant, and today we're speaking with someone who's made a career out of challenging our collective addiction to certainty, quick fixes, and superhero leadership narratives. He's author of No Silver Bullet and contributor to our Elegant Simplicity campaign. Drum roll, it's Steve Hearsum. Hello, Steve.
Hello,
lovely
Nick.
to see you again.
Oh, what an introduction. I can now go and lie down in a darkened room and rest easy.
Yeah, nice. For those who don't know, why don't you just do a brief introduction about who you are and what's been going on in your mind over the past few years?
So I'm a consultant, supervisor, author, amongst other things. Those are, I guess, the primary roles I play, including also executive coach. The book is quite frugal in the last few years. I mean, it came out 2 years ago when it was 4 years of writing before that. And that was very much about how unconscious patterns of shame and anxiety drive decision-making behaviors in organizations and fuel this market for quick fix solutions. But what's fallen out of that, and what I think occupies me most, and it is a falling out of that inquiry, are several things. One is the degree to which we don't talk about fragility in practice or leadership. And what do we do when we experience ourselves as essentially delicate and brittle, and we deny that. The other things that are falling out of my ongoing inquiries, and this has influenced my own work, is I'm very much locating my business and my work with clients in the container labeled practice. You know, what are the practices you need to develop around leadership? What are the practices you need to develop as consultants and change practitioners and all design people or all development? What are the one that's actually been quite figural recently is I reframed my offer in as much as I'm a consultant with my own small business. I talk about culture, and I kind of thought, well, actually, I'm one person. When I talk about culture, what am I offering? I'm offering methodologies, I'm offering tools. And it occurred to me that actually the link to what I do with leaders and consultants is very clear. It's helping clients develop the practices that their people need in order to change their experience of the organization and each other. And so one of the things I've been mulling on is how much time we waste on culture, in inverted commas, and methodologies and tools, utterly missing that it's actually about practice. Practices.
And that's very much in the space that Tricordant likes to swim within. We want to be known as practice leaders rather than thought leaders, because it's very much about what can you actually do.
My thoughts, my thoughts and feelings on thought leadership, Nick, and you really don't want to start me off on that one, do you?
No, we'll get you off that soapbox for a moment. So you may creep back on it later. But while we kind of step back and think about what's driving some of this fragility in the leadership mindset, if you kind of think about the wider world and what's impacting the leadership mindset in today's world, what's driving some of this fragility that you see, Steve?
Some of this is age-old existential stuff and being part of the human condition, which is how do we live with and in uncertainty, however you choose to describe it, through whichever model of VUCA or BANI or anything else you prefer. But what I notice working with clients at the moment, I think there's two key patterns, and I'll link it to a third thing. So the first thing, I've been noticing in the last couple of years more and more how even senior leadership teams find it incredibly difficult to simply hold each other to account around task and behavior. And I've started intentionally talking to other practitioners, and what's emerging is that pretty much everyone says, yep. It's a common thing. And you then kind of ask yourself, how is it in all the rhetoric around leadership and organizations that the one thing, or one of the things that is central to anything happening or changing, the ability to hold each other to account, is a muscle that is incredibly weak. And that links to the second point, which is the pressures that are arising from the external environment, whether you want to put it down to global politics, warfare, climate, AI, and so on, means that there is even more denigration of and ignoring of the importance of relationality and relational practices.
Yes. Yes.
And then just to kind of tie that off on the third point, I sat in on a webinar with the Oxford Review this morning and some fascinating stuff about AI. But what was more interesting to me was that it actually confirmed my own hypothesis that relationality is just being kind of left behind and ignored. And one thing that just leapt out at me that David Wilkinson said, he said, one of the other things that comes out of all the research that they've been doing on AI is the sense of awe around AI. So we question less.
Yeah.
And I think the inability to ask good questions, and more importantly, to hang around when somebody asks a really useful question, is probably the biggest risk to organizations at the moment.
And that very much aligns with a conversation I was having on LinkedIn, I think only yesterday or the day before, talking about leaders and uncertainty, and leadership for that matter, and followership. And people in spaces of uncertainty, when they're feeling there's a lot of ambiguity, they're not sure what to do, people are going to opt for leaders who are going to say that they have a clear view of what to do and how to do it and where to go and all the rest. And I know that's going to come back to where we've been before. And yet, you know, we recognize that the increasing levels of complexity is a space that we have to be able to swim within.
So you just helped me ask a question I think that's been lurking in my head since you started talking to me about elegant simplicity. Right? And I think the question is, why is the notion of simplicity, whether it's elegant or otherwise, so terrifying? Because if it wasn't terrifying, if it wasn't discombobulating, at face value, you'd think there'd be a lot more interest and a lot more willingness to engage in what it might entail. And I'm just wondering what it is that I'm not going to make this about all of us, not them out there. What is it that we get to either ignore or deny about ourselves or each other if we collude with the idea that things are actually a lot more complicated than they really are? Or that the problems inherently require something profoundly complex or complicated to begin to wrestle with them.
Yeah. And I think that's certainly going to speak into a space where people, and I hear this in different sectors, whether the pharmaceutical sector or in NHS, central government, anywhere there's quite a lot of regulation. There tends to be and I spoke about this with Tim Haynes, in fact, in a podcast, talking about expertise being desired or valued. And if you're an expert, then surely you can't provide a simple solution. So that's why
I love that. I love that.
Because you're an expert, it can't be simple. It must be something complicated or complex for you to therefore go, oh, look how great the solution is. It covers everything.
But that is on the assumption, and this is really interesting, that you are a practitioner or consultant whose ego and identity is dependent upon your self-narrative and the narrative about you being about how wonderful and brilliant and clever you are. Yes. If you are a practitioner, and I think you fall into a similar category as me, Nick, who has an inherent understanding and appreciation of your own absurdity, there is no terror at all in revealing what you don't know. Far from it, it is utterly congruent with an acceptance of your own limitations and a valuing of the capacities and the intelligence and the knowledge and the expertise and experience your clients come with.
Yeah, yes. And I see it in some of the leaders I speak with, and of course within, we're all on a journey, so we'll slip every so often as well. So, that's part of that ongoing reflection and reflexivity in the moment of, okay, what am I actually saying here? Hang on, did I just say that? But I certainly see it with some of the leaders that I'm working with, where they don't want to be vulnerable. They cannot afford to be vulnerable in front of their colleagues And because their leaders, their followers, their people have put them on a pedestal, you said you know how to navigate, surf, find your way through this complexity, this time of uncertainty. Therefore, we are following you. We have put you up on this pedestal. Therefore, please continue providing that. And I think that's what's happening broadly in many organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Which in one sense kind of says not much has changed. With all the AI stuff, there's this kind of narrative of lots of stuff is different. Well, absolutely it is. But at a human level, with some of the underlying tensions and things we wrestle with seem to be remarkably similar now as to what they were 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 50 years ago. But then maybe I'm naive.
Yeah. And even longer than that, I don't think complexity is a completely new thing. Yes, it may have exacerbated with the level of connections that we now have, but we've always had complexity across the world, and leaders have always had to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I guess the additional conundrum these days is the speed at which it is flowing and manifesting around us.
Yeah, which then is one of the things that works against the ability to create the conditions for dialogue and sense making.
Yeah.
And I was doing a piece of work last week with a colleague of mine, Helen Charles Edwards, and she very appropriately, in the middle of what was a quite challenging session, was talking to the group we were working with about the difference between calling out and calling in behavior. And this idea that, calling out behavior, which is very common at the moment, it's public and confrontational, pointing out somebody else's harmful behavior, what they're doing wrong. And the utility of that is it names a problem clearly and signals to people more widely what's unacceptable. But it is public and it is confronting, and it fits very much with the current political and social discourse about how we resolve tensions. Calling in, however, is more private, and here's the kicker, it's inherently relational. But that is not something that is valued as much at the moment. So the ability to do calling in behavior, which is where trust comes, which is where the ability to really help people understand where their behaviors, how they might need to learn from what you're pointing out, that stuff gets lost. If you rely on the calling out stuff, then you are going to eventually evoke shame and defensiveness. And if I link it to your core thing here, which is elegant simplicity. I don't know how you can achieve elegant simplicity without somewhere during the process of achieving it, if it is an achievement, you can't enter into a process of sense making and dialogue.
Yeah, and I think in your blog that you've written for the Elegant Simplicity campaign, you also talk about the assets within the individual and being able to work on self and understanding how you show up, and elegant simplicity, it isn't a tool or methodology. It's actually a mindset. It's a discipline that comes from within, and you've got to do that both reflective and reflexive work to enable that to happen and to show up in the space. So I can certainly see how that all works together, and then kind of saying, okay, if this is how I'm showing up, how I'm presenting to the world, how I'm working with others, then of course the leadership and relational infrastructure within an organization is something that you're going to value a lot more, because you're going to recognize that I cannot know everything. It's just impossible. Even with AI, we cannot know everything. And maybe AI is the new organizational blankie, the kind of term that you've coined before, that leaders like to cling on to and think that they're going to be safe because they've got their blankie.
And there is an element of that. The bit that I find fascinating about the AI stuff, and there's tons of useful stuff about the way it's eroding critical thinking and our ability to make decisions collaboratively or to kind of access our networks. We rely on the thing. One of the bits of research I read a while ago that stayed with me, which didn't come up actually this morning on the thing I was attending that strongly, is that it amplifies people's sense of their own incompetence or lack of competence relative to AI. They feel unworthy because they simply don't know as much. And I've noticed how little actually that is talked about. Lots of the other things about AI are talked about, but this erosion of our sense of competence and our identity as being expert or knowledgeable about, whether it be leadership, or something that we are technically skilled at. Of course, I guess, I'm answering my own question. Of course, it's not being talked about as much because that evokes shame. We want it to remain hidden. We can't talk about it.
Yeah. If we're an expert, if we're supposed to be the decider, the decision maker, the know-it-all who can give the answer to the solution to the big problem. Yeah.
And there's you asked your question at the outset was, what's currently going on? And I'll speak from I for a moment. So I'm working on 2 more book projects, which are going to take an age to get to fruition. But I used one of the LLMs to help me shape the chapter structure based on 2 pages of notes with my co-author. And it came back with the most incredible summary of 12 chapters. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and went, oh my goodness, I could never have come up with something as sophisticated as that. And I looked at more with them. I could write to that and that would be it. Mm-hmm. So I caught my own sense of inferiority and my own sense of less thanness. But what I also realized in that moment was, of course, if the question you're seeking to answer, and this applies to leaders as well who use, or people in organizations who use AI, if the question you're trying to answer is, how do I write a book and publish a book that is up to date, contains all the relevant content, and is written as expertly as possible? That is not the same question as how do I write a book that I also am close to enough and understand enough that if you asked me in 12 months' time to talk about what I'd learned, that I could actually, without looking at an AI, or picking up a copy of a book that had been written by an AI, I'd be able to tell you because it's part of me.
Yes, and that's actually, not the AI part, of course, but it's a question that I like to ask in the European Organization Design Forum Book Club. When authors come in to talk about their books, I often ask them, okay, you wrote this 2-3 years ago. How has your thinking moved on, if at all? And that's a lovely way of just seeing that a book is just a snapshot in time of one person's thinking, and yet our thinking continues to develop.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So talking about writing things, a little while ago, you wrote a blog called Crisis Leadership and the Myth of Fixability. And it's about navigating a crisis, how to become a leader who responds rather than reacts. So, what shifts when a leader moves from reacting to responding, I think is the question I'd like to explore next.
Well, I'm going to strip this right back down to something I say to my clients at the moment. I've stripped back, in a sense, my provocation and offer to clients into one simple metaphor, which is they need to learn how to dance differently.
Oh, yes.
Because if you're doing a cha-cha and the music and the context changes and what you need to do is a rumba or a waltz, or you need to do a line dance with lots of other people and be a bit more integrated and collaborative.
I know you're a heavy trance person, Steve, but let's go with the traditional.
Yeah. I mean, I like a bit of funk. Yeah, a bit of funk and drum and bass. But yeah, if you need to change your moves, of course, that's going to be probably uncomfortable, particularly if if you don't dance much in that way at all, or if it's something radically different to what you're used to. And the other bit that I think is interesting about the dance metaphor is you're probably going to be really visibly uncomfortable to those around you.
Yeah.
And there's at least 2 levels of visibility here. I'll go with 3. There's the visibility in your own mind's eye. There's the visibility to your peers in a leadership team. And then there's the visibility to those who observe the leadership team. And they will have different degrees of, or different flavors of exposure that you will feel viscerally.
Mm. Mm.
So the dance metaphor isn't just a one about the lived experience or the physical challenge.
Mm.
It's about what it means to be in the spotlight on the dance floor, seen.
Yeah, yeah. And it's often a question that we like to ask leaders at the beginning of like an org design and org development project. I was working with a central government department, and they were asking us, and in this case it was culture development. And so the question we asked the leaders right up front was, okay, well, how is your behavior? How are you going to show up differently to reinforce this new way of being, so that the people around you can see that and not just say, okay, everyone else changes, but we're going to stay the same.
Yeah. And some of the research that I was reading recently about something that came out of Henley, and there was a couple of stats just leapt out at me. One was, I think it was 59% of employees said that every week they saw senior leadership actions contradict stated values.
Yeah.
I mean, poof, there you go. There's the challenge in a nutshell. And to link it back to, again, the starting point, because I'm very mindful of this kind of backdrop of elegant simplicity. I think I could argue the response to that stat is both one that requires an elegant simplicity, but paradoxically will feel anything but, potentially. So I'm wondering whether there's a tension here between the elegant simplicity of what we might need to do and the internal lived experience of that which may be, in a sense, elegantly simple, behave differently.
Yeah.
In some senses, it's actually really simple, Nick, isn't it? Instead of telling people what to do all the time, don't micromanage. It's not the same as your internal mess and stew and soup of emotions and beliefs that lead you to micromanaging behaviors in the first place.
Yes. Yeah. And that kind of tips a tap towards the shadow side of change that we wrote that article a little while ago and published on our website, talking about, in essence, loss, and how people don't necessarily resist change, but they don't like loss. And so they see change as loss, really. And so it's like when they feel that they're going to lose something, then they may say, hang on, that's something I'm not comfortable with, and they resist it in that way.
Well, that talks to one of my other, I'll pull out a small soapbox, which is I detest the rhetoric of resistance to change. Not least, there's actually, and I've looked for it since, Nick, and I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but there's a South African academic or consultant or writer called Coetzee, who came up with a really elegant and simple model that described resistance to change. And it stayed with me ever since I saw it. And it's basically a horseshoe. And basically what he says is you've got the people who are resisting and the people who are in favor of. And at the bottom of the horseshoe, you've got the people who are apathetic and don't care.
Yeah.
And he says the ones you've got to worry about are those ones.
Yeah.
The ones who are resisting care.
Yeah.
They've got energy.
Yeah. Well, that's what Paul Taginci, he talks about resistance as a gift, because for that very reason is they're engaging. It's the people who are not engaging that are the concern. Yeah. And those who are listening to the voices of resistance, because they may then side with the resistors, and that could then cause a problem. And so there is a conversation to be had about how do you manage the in essence, the news, the conversation that's happening within an organization. Yeah. How do you work that through so people seeing that, using Burkhart's the Burkhart equation, where you've got dissatisfaction, vision, first steps. Those who are satisfied, those who have a vision, but actually you've got to have both of those kind of working through with some first steps for you to overcome resistance and work it through.
I mean, one of the things that I think what this exchange between us has lurking beneath it is, of course, that so long as we believe that all these conversations around elegant simplicity and change are rational, we're going to be deluding ourselves and each other. And what came to mind was I've only ever worked with one client who I thought genuinely fitted the the label of resistant to change. And there was this moment working with him about 10 years ago where he was doing a senior leader in an NHS organisation. And he was doing some work with a colleague. And we got to this point in this conversation where I went and joined them, where I said to him, is there anything that I or your colleague could say or tell you that would lead you to change what you believe about the situation? And he said, no, there's nothing. And I clarified it. Is there nothing that we could offer you by way of data or by anything else? He said, no. And at that point, you're in a different category.
Yeah. That's ideology, maybe.
Yeah.
Beliefs. Yeah. How they see the world. And you say, but yeah. And that's a very different way of having to work with people in that space. So what was your approach in that space then?
I think, if I remember correctly,
what did you think? What did you try at least? Because we know there's no silver bullet. So what did you experiment with? What was the
I think what we had to do was kind of leave him with the potential consequences of that worldview, which is, it's absolutely fine for you to carry on believing that.
Yeah.
And
I
mean, his colleague, I think, could see exactly what was going on. That this was a zero-sum game in terms of any potential of a shift.
We had a similar situation with another client, again in central government, someone like that who wasn't willing to change. And we're saying, well, it's difficult. We want to support them and enable them, help them to see the benefits of why they need to move into a new way of working, etc. But ultimately, you're going to change everything around them. Yeah. And ultimately, the system will change, and then they need to make a choice about whether they want to be part of that system going forward or not. Yeah. Because there's a very old adage in the org design industry that talks about, if you can't change the people, change the people. And it's quite harsh, but sometimes that does happen.
Yeah, which then runs up against the whole thing about, is it the people or the wider system?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We're trying to look at all of it. So you mentioned a little while ago, things in tension, and you've been talking about the need for leaders to hold multiple truths. Maybe elegant, maybe simple, might not work quite as intended. But what gets in the way of leaders developing this both and mindset, and what does it look like when you do?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think there's one thing, Nick. I think you have to look at it. There'll be patterns whereby there'll be many similar reasons why people struggle with both and. We've just mentioned one, which is ideologically. But then underneath that is the fear of, what if my ideology is not true? What might I have to accept about the state of the world, the nature of the world, or myself, that if I do find out that this is not true? It's terrifying. So I think terror is one of the things, that you might find out that things are not actually as they are, or that you might find out that you're not actually as you are, that your ego ideal or the organizational ideal is not what you imagined it to be. I think there's also the wider patterns, which is how much permission and protection is there for both and thinking within the context within which you operate. So are you working in a leadership team which is genuinely comfortable with the possibility that things might be nuanced, or indeed there is permission to be ambivalent about things? It's not okay these days to be ambivalent. You have to be the for or against something. So in terms of political and social discourse, it's very much and I see that in organisations as well. So I think that's another thing. There's also the wider rhetoric, despite the fact that, you and I are representative of a subset of management thinking and organisational thinking, which does hold both and thinking to be useful and a reflection of reality. However, you and I both know that there is a whole body of work and a whole body of practice and practices that make a lot of money, and industries that make a lot of money selling certainty. and selling binary. If you do this, then you do that. Then you get that output. So it's very hard, I would suggest, for particularly senior leaders to hold a position of, hang on a minute, what if it's a little bit more complicated than that? So I can't tell you who said this to me. You'll understand why in a moment. But in one of my roles, I was involved in a conversation with some senior people from a major business school in the UK. And they were talking to an organization I'm involved in about involving us in their programs, because what this organization does is work with unconscious processes and all that messy stuff. And they're interested in collaborating because they're very open. They don't have that kind of practice within their faculty. Why would they? They're a they are one of the top business schools in the world, right?
Yeah.
But there was this lovely moment where this person said, we know, and we have clients that come to us when they've been to 4 or 5 of the other business schools, and they've done very similar things with all the business schools, and then they'll come to us, and they're kind of beginning to realize that the solutions and the approaches that are offered by business schools, which are often selling certainty of one sort, form, or another, may not actually be helping. And this business school was kind of going, we're kind of having to recognize there may be something else we need to offer, which is why we're talking to you. That's secondary to this point, which is there you have an organization that's part of a way of thinking about organizations that is recognizing the limitations of either or certain thinking.
Yeah.
But in order to move to that place, you have to admit that what you offer may not be the be all and end all.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is also interdependent with what the market is asking for. So if leaders are starting to recognize in themselves that either or options and complexity are not going to work, and actually you've got to think more both and, then they are going to be seeking out support to help them develop and work that through.
Yeah.
But if the leadership mindset hasn't gotten to that place yet, then you may be a prophet in the corner. So there's, and being a business school, they are looking to be profitable and not a prophet in the corner.
There's absolutely. And when, some universities, I know of one university, I was working with them a few years ago, and the head of the business school at one point said, we are responsible for 25% of this university's income. Why would they stop selling certainty? It's an existential threat to them if they reduce that level of income, certainly in the current climate. The other bit I don't think we talk about that much, Nick, and yes, it is something that I've written about and talked about, but how easy is it for those who sell certainty and binary thinking to admit that may not be the only game in town?
Yeah.
What might they have to accept about their offers and their wares if that is not true?
So leaders have I want to use the word duty, maybe it's not the right word, but really they need their own capability to be able to step back in the moment and to see what's going on in the situation and to decide what type of decision do we need to make here? Is it a both and type of decision? Is it an either or type of trade-off? Is it something else entirely? And I think that's a capability that not everyone is developing or recognizing they need to develop. And, we've got Dave Snowden with Canervan framework, which is really, really lovely and just really beneficial when people understand what type of system they're in and how they need to operate within that system. But I also see that you were reacting there, Steve. So why don't you?
Well, because I agree with you. I think it's brilliant. But what I also notice is again the risk, and this is not about Snowden or the model, but I do notice that there are people out there who are very much acolytes and huge fans of it, and that's brilliant because I've used it. But it can be fetishized, And even when you take, and if you take the Snowden model as a useful intervention to use with senior leaders, and I think it is a very useful scaffold for a conversation. I go back to my point earlier on, quite early in our conversation, which is unless you have the practices to do sense making and dialogue in groups and in teams, doesn't matter how good the theory is. Kind of moot.
Yes. So leadership is a team behavior. Yeah.
You said earlier on, what are the key skills that people need to develop in this context? And the word we didn't use was reflexivity. And without reflexivity, you cannot learn how to dance differently, either physically or relationally.
Well, let's touch on that a little bit. So why do you see reflexivity as so essential to sustaining elegant simplicity and wider leadership, of course?
Well, I'll put it in simple terms. And this applies to practitioners as well as leaders, Nick, right? So you and I, along with our two biggest clients, could go away for a long weekend retreat together.
Yeah.
And we could do 3 days of deep critical reflection and understanding on why the way we show up is deeply linked to our relationship with our mum and dad.
I've done that, actually.
Right, okay. And we will then go back to the office on Monday and do naff all that's different. We do nothing that's different. But we've done some really good work together. And we've had some great conversations, possibly at a very nice retreat centre. And that, to me, is the difference between doing the critical reflection and then making the link to, well, how are you actually going to show up differently? What are you going to attempt to do with no guarantee of success that might introduce a difference into the dynamic of relationships and the system or systems you operate in, and that might go badly or well, and then how might you then come out of that to reflect further on that and then go back in? And that reflexive dance of moving in and out of inquiry is key to this, which is why I bang on so much about the problem with consulting and change practice and OD and D practice, that so few of us have supervision. How on earth can you say that you are taking your clients to the place where they have to do the work they need to do when you're not doing your own work? And if you haven't got a supervisory space or something analogous to it, then where do you go to get yourself clean of all the mess?
Yeah, and that also combines with that ongoing internal work of in the moment, reflecting on how you are showing up to people, how you're impacting them with the words, with your behaviors, and then adjusting in the moment, that true reflexivity in the moment.
And I'm going to ground this in something deeply personal, right? Yeah. So last week I was staying in London to prepare for what I knew would be a really interesting but challenging gig. And it was. And you and I have spoken about some of the stuff I have going on outside of my work context. And last week, frankly, I was at my most brittle and fragile that I've been in a long time. And I knew that if I turned up at that session on the Wednesday without having attended to what was going on inside me, I would be in role, but I would not be of service sufficiently, because I would be managing and containing my deep distress. And what happened was, I happened to be in my men's group on Tuesday night online, and I bawled my eyes out with a bunch of other guys. Now there's that, and I'm not saying this to kind of score pity points or anything. I'm saying this to make a point about reflexivity. I would argue it was a reminder to me that reflexivity is about really recognizing who you are and what's going on and what you need to attend to in order to do the work you are there to do. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying I get it right every time. But last week, I knew I needed to go into a place where I could attend to my inner mess. And that's a wonderful example of demonstrating vulnerability here in the moment, but also recognizing you're in service of others. And if you're going to be in service of others, then you need to show up to the best of your ability and understanding what is happening within you and how you need to be able to deal with that to be able to be in service of others. And again, I feel driven to link this back to simplicity, which is what occurs to me. Well, there was something remarkably simple, if painful, about being online with half a dozen other guys. And that moment, I can still feel it now, of just recognizing I said a few words during the check-in and then I just lost it. I just was crying. And there's something simple and elegantly simple about recognizing who you are, what's going on, what you need in the moment. And the link to the organizational context is, whether you're a practitioner or a leader, if you know what happens when leaders are in a moment where the pressure and the compression is such that something has to give. Now, are they attending to themselves in such a way that what gives is there something in them which allows them to respond? Or have they denied some aspect of what has been going on such that what gives becomes a break or a rupture that is not that helpful? And I don't think that you can resource yourself appropriately unless you're attending to your internal process and your internal landscape and the reflexive stuff on an ongoing basis.
And that's not just leaders, really. It's for any individual involved in the change process. And you often see it where it all kind of come bleeding out into a workshop, where people are concerned about, maybe it's their job or they're concerned about something else. There's a lot going on at home. They've got someone unwell, or they're under pressure from multiple fronts for whatever reason it is. And then it manifests in a workshop where sometimes they explode, sometimes they attack the process and the facilitator, and actually it's recognizing what's going on within the individual and helping them to spot that for themselves, to allow the process of the workshop to continue.
Absolutely.
So I thought we'd do a little bit of a change of pace as we come towards the end of this podcast. Calling it the lightning round of questions. So you only got a few seconds to be able to respond to these.
It's like speed dating all over again. Give it to me now.
And some of them may be a little bit personal, so we'll see where we get to.
All right,
now,
go for it, mate.
Are you ready? Here we go. So you talked about accountability, and that's conversations that leaders often avoid. So what does avoidance really reveal about the culture of an organization?
Fear. Fear. It reveals what's too hot to talk about. It also reveals what needs to be talked about.
Okay. So what are typical self-deception tells when you hear or see leaders claiming that they want simplicity or to keep things focused?
What? So that when they kind of deflect or avoid the
well, they say we want simplicity, but then So they
what immediately popped into my head, so I'm not going to censor it, Nick, is I'd like a detailed slide deck and presentation on that, please. And the longer, the better, and with the more models, the better.
Just demonstrate your expertise so I can confirm you really know what you're talking about.
Yeah, because all slide decks are ultimately, once they move past their utility as communication channels, is they're just containers for anxiety. That's all they are.
The other one I see is when the leader shows up as expert and says, well, I have the answer. This is what we need to do. Let's do that. And that's the way we can take things forward.
Well, you don't need me then. That's fine. Get on with it.
The other one I see is, let's just be pragmatic. I get that quite regularly, like, oh, that's really interesting. What do you mean by let's be pragmatic? In other words, let's just avoid all the hard work because it's too much. That. And let's just do the thing that I want or we think is the simplest route to the future.
I think what you're helping me see is the other big tell is the emphasis will be relentlessly on task. Well, that goes back to your earlier point. Back to your earlier point of not dealing with relationships and engaging people in conversation.
So here's a couple of personal ones. What's one truth about your own leadership anxiety that you've never said out loud?
Okay, this would be true. And as much as that, I don't think I lead people. I haven't done for years. But if you were to drop me into a context where I did, one of my huge strengths is that I'm a great improviser and I can work with off the cuff. And if the plan goes to pot, I'm fine. But equally, with what that means is that I'm at the other end of my comfort zone is structuring. I can structure. I'm half German, for crying out loud. But it's not. I wouldn't put it as one of my core strengths. So I would say, have I planned enough? Yeah. Would I have planned enough? Have I thought enough about the different aspects? Because that requires a kind of strategic thinking over there, whereas I'm very much orientated towards the here and now. So that would be my main anxiety.
I think if just to be fair, if you're going to ask the same question of me, I think that's the anxiety within me is I feel like I'm holding the system together. So
it's on you.
It's a fallacy that I tell myself. I'm holding it together, and if I'm not there, will things fall apart? Of course, that means that I get exhausted.
They will, Nick. It's all on you. They will.
Thank you. Yeah. He needs friends. Yeah. Well, he needs enemies. We've got friends like this, is what I'm saying. Here's another one. If you're required to give up one piece of power, control, or identity you currently hold on to, what would you resist losing the most and why?
Well, I don't think I have really any power.
Or maybe it's an identity thing.
Identity. I wouldn't want to give up the part of my identity that signals that I'm very comfortable with my own absurdity. Because that would deny something that I think is profoundly human about me and about the rest of us. I think an appreciation of our absurdity is essential, elemental.
Yeah.
So I would really, really not like to lose that.
Yeah. I think for me it would be about serving others. Yeah, because that's so deeply entrenched in my identity and my faith. Right. So I even had a bit of an argument with a coach once upon a time. He was helping me how I show up as a leader, and I was talking about how service is so important to me. I'd rather lead from the middle than ever lead from the front.
Right.
Because I always want to be working with people
with,
as opposed to come this way. I have the answer.
Yeah, I can see that, Nick.
Yeah,
I can see that in you.
Steve, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Really enjoyed it. Time flew by for me.
Certainly did. All right. Have a good day.